Hello, dear friends. You are on Ruslan Belov's channel, and this is the daily summary of combat operations from the Ukrainian front. Well, yesterday, for a couple of hours, it almost smelled like peace, right? Then, of course, it stopped smelling like that. What do I mean? The Americans were developing a 28-point plan together with the Russian authorities. The plan includes the withdrawal of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, from Donetsk Oblast, recognition by the United States and other countries of Crimea and Donetsk Oblast as, importantly, Russian territory, a reduction in the size of the AFU by 2.5 times, restrictions on the AFU regarding long-range weapons so that they would not have long-range capabilities, the restoration of the Russian language as a state language, the return of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. Well, and of course, abandoning NATO and so on. A pretty workable plan, right? At least better than what we had seen before. But Zelensky, as you may have guessed, has already rejected it, and Ukrainians stated that this is a capitulation plan for them. So the war continues, the fighting continues, and we return to reviewing the situation at the front. So friends, despite Zelensky's refusal, peace may still have come closer than it was, let's say, a week ago. And quite an important role in this is played, by the way, by the successes of the Russian army. And there are successes, and they are becoming more and more significant. Yesterday, we discussed one of the main pieces of news, that the Russian army entered Siversk, and in just 2 days, 20% of the city has already been taken, which, by the way, was also confirmed by Julian Hrubka, a military analyst from the German outlet Bild. The fighting in the city continues. Yesterday, separate Russian assault groups were already spotted in the center of Siversk. Some people were quick to claim that Russian forces had taken half of Siversk. That is not true. 20% is what is currently under firm Russian control. Given 3 days of assault in such a well-defended and fortified city as Siversk, the result is phenomenal. I remind you that the Russian army had already tried storming Siversk back in July 2022, but things ended very unsuccessfully back then. Now we are seeing a completely different picture. And Zelensky will have to think about whether to send more reserves here or what he should do. But you know where else the Russian army has shown phenomenal results? In Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and not even in the zone of responsibility of the Vostok East Group, but in the zone of responsibility of the Center Group, in the Medvedev direction. If you remember, on November 15th, the soldiers, under the cover of fog, managed to break into Novopavlivka on armored vehicles and land infantry. They did this several times, bringing a sufficient amount of infantry into this very large settlement. And what date do we have now? It is November 20th, meaning 5 days have passed since that breakthrough, and what do we see? We see that most of Novopavlivka is already under the control of the Russian army. And again, this is a large settlement, even though officially it is a village. Its area is 15 square kilometers, which is 1.5 times larger than the city of Selidov and larger than the city of Soledar, meaning it is a huge settlement. Moreover, it is divided into 2 parts by a river, which only complicates its assault. And yet, despite the size, despite the river, despite all these difficulties, more than half, no, even more, about 80% of Novopavlivka's territory has come under Russian control in 5 days. Over the past 24 hours, the entire eastern part of the village was fully cleared. And the eastern part, as you can see on the map, is the larger portion of Novopavlivka. There are more streets here, more households. And all of this is now under Russian control. But most importantly, they managed to cross the Solona River and enter the western part of the village. And not just enter, but take the northern section of the western half of the village, advancing all the way to Molodezhnaya Street, which is on the very outskirts of the village. What remains now is to finish clearing the center and the southern part of the western half of Novopavlivka. And there, the houses and streets are not as densely arranged as in the eastern half, meaning the advance should be easier. But Ukrainian military analysts have their own reality. In their reality, Novopavlivka has already been cleared by the AFU, and there are no Russian troops there. Nevertheless, I believe it is important to say that in reality, the situation is indeed more complicated than what the map shows. You look at the map and see red shading. You might think everything is cleared, Russian soldiers are everywhere, total control. No, that's not the case. Reality is more complex. In fact, not everything is cleared. In some basements there are AFU soldiers, and in some places control is not complete. So there is still a lot of work ahead, and when you look at the map, it might seem that tomorrow the village will be fully under Russian control. But that is unlikely. The AFU is still resisting here, still trying to counterattack. And as I said, even though the map is shaded red, full control is not everywhere. This is also a layered structure, somewhere a grey zone, somewhere Russian control. And this is not only here, but in many other settlements being stormed by the Russian army. All of this happens because of the nature of the fighting. This is not World War II, with huge regiments and infantry lines. Here, everything is done by small groups of several soldiers. And in such a situation, AFU infantry may suddenly appear behind Russian lines, just as Russian infantry may get behind theirs, because the front line is not dense and is held by small groups of a few people. Still, the progress is obvious, and if Novopavlivka is finally taken, it will become a huge problem for the AFU, because after Novopavlivka, look, they have nowhere to hold on until Mezheve. They will have to retreat about 9 kilometers to the north. There is a straight road to Mezheve with no settlements. There are only 2 settlements on the flanks. To the east, the village of Chuhuyev, a tiny settlement with 2 streets, each 1 kilometer long. Well, what is that? Can you hold on there for long? Of course not. To the west, the village of Fedorivska, also small, also 2 main streets, but they are longer, about 2 kilometers each. But it is clear that if Novopavlivka falls, neither of these settlements will be able to stop the Russian army. And besides those 2, there is nothing else in the way. So the loss of Novopavlivka will be a huge blow for the AFU because it will immediately open the way to Mezheve. And the soldiers of the center group carried out a brilliant operation here, managing to bring in infantry under the cover of fog. And let's move on. Let's move a bit lower to the zone of responsibility of the Vostok, East Group. The guys there say that the situation has become a bit more difficult for them, because the AFU somehow scraped together some reserves, and these reserves have already arrived here. This means it has become harder to advance, since the AFU has started launching counterattacks. If previously they were simply retreating, you saw it yourself, 1 settlement, then another, a third, a 5th, everything was just collapsing. But now, not anymore. Now they have started fighting back. Of course, I'm more than sure this won't stop the Vostok group, and they will reach, at least, the defensive line along the Haicha River, 100%. And without a doubt, they will reach Huliaipol. But still, we will most likely see a certain slowdown in their tempo in the near future. By the way, yesterday the fighters shared footage from the Huliaipol-Malinivka highway. That's this road, and there Ukrainian soldiers tried to escape along it. They were running from the village of Zatishne toward Huliaipol. What do you think the outcome was? A group of Ukrainian soldiers was running from Zatishne, hoping to reach Huliaipol and hide there. But it didn't work out. Russian drone operators struck them right there, and they were all torn to pieces. They ended up lying right on the highway. Let's move on. There were advances over the past day also in Pokrovsk, or rather, already outside Pokrovsk, since the city is 99.9% under Russian control. In the past 24 hours, they managed to push the front line northward. That's the first thing. And the second, and probably very important advance, was toward Hrishin. They managed to move 750 meters toward the settlement, taking a dacha cooperative along the way. From current positions, it's only 500 meters to the first houses of Hrishin, and taking Hrishin is extremely important because this settlement has now become an operational hub and staging base for the Ukrainian forces. It's from there that they attempt to launch pushes toward Pokrovsk, and as long as the Russian army does not take Hrishin, they will always contest Russian control over the northern part of the city. Conversely, if the Russian army takes Hrishin, then the last Ukrainian strongpoint will be knocked out, and they'll have to retreat 8 kilometers northward, directly toward the outskirts of Dobropilya. That's how things stand. What else can I say? In the Dobropilya sector, some gradual activity is taking place, but so far it remains limited. Near Dorozhne, they tried to gain a foothold in the southern part of the industrial zone, and very heavy fighting also continues near Shakov. On the other parts of the front, over the past 24 hours, there has been good news from the Lyman direction. Russian fighters managed to break into the city and began to establish positions there. So we can already say that the battle for Lyman has officially begun. The northern front here is slowly starting to move, and I think we will soon see the beginning of an encirclement of the Donetsk urban agglomeration from the north. And look at the situation. In Siversk, the Russian army is advancing. 20% of the city has already collapsed. In Vovchansk, we're advancing. In Kupiansk, we're advancing. Now we've begun entering Lyman more deeply. In Kostiantynivka, a part of the city, a small one, but still, is under Russian control. Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad are falling apart, that's obvious. And they're closing in on Huliapol as well. That's the situation on the front. Cities on the Ukrainian side are beginning to fall away. The front is cracking. Just look, a day ago the advance was 70 square kilometers in a single day. And Zelensky is being offered a normal, adequate plan. It's a compromise plan from the Russian side, because even though the Ukrainian armed forces are withdrawing troops from Donetsk Oblast, and Western countries and the US recognize Crimea and Donetsk Oblast as part of Russia, the Ukrainian army would be reduced by 2.5 times. Certain types of weapons would be restricted. This is still a compromise plan, because there are still Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblasts, and the line of contact there. Nevertheless, even this plan is being rejected by Ukraine, and you want to ask, what are you thinking? Fine, let's say we return to negotiations in a year. Where will the line of contact be in a year? Several more cities in Donetsk Oblast will likely fall away. Russian troops will most likely advance to the approaches of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Maybe they won't capture them in a year, but they'll reach the outskirts. And where will the line of contact be in the other oblasts? Look at how Russia is advancing now in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia oblasts. At what speed the Russian army is moving. Zelensky either doesn't understand, or I don't know what he's thinking. Because even this plan is the best plan he could get. A year from now, the conditions will be much worse. But for Zelensky, the main thing now is to cling to power until Russian troops reach Kiev. He is counting on Russia exhausting itself, and he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. He has money stored offshore, and he doesn't care about the people. So that's all I have for today regarding the situation at the front. Now let's go into more detail about the political news, of which there has been a lot lately, since new attempts to end the Ukrainian conflict have intensified. The terms of the peace agreement developed by the US and Russia will be presented to Zelensky today or tomorrow, Reuters reports, as relayed by Diana Panchenko. I'll reveal a secret. A confidential dialogue between Russia and the US has been ongoing the entire time. What we are seeing now is the consequence of previous agreements. And the hardest thing for Ukrainians to understand will be that open borders and Zelensky's anti-corruption efforts are actually direct demands from Putin. Putin has publicly stated this many times. No one would have opened the borders for people, and no one would have dealt with corruption. These are direct demands Putin made in negotiations with the US. It turns out Putin is asking the Americans to provide a normal life for Ukrainians. And Zelensky has now announced a restart of peace negotiations. This is the same man who, in 2022, introduced a law forbidding peace talks. Right now, thousands of men and women are sitting in Ukrainian prisons simply because they spoke in favor of dialogue. They didn't want anything bad. Zelensky never cared about the amount of lost territory. He never cared about the number of people killed on both sides of the front. But only when his entire circle was caught red-handed stealing billions, only when prison time became a personal threat to him, did he suddenly start thinking about negotiations. I call on everyone not to give him any security guarantees. We must restore the rule of law in Ukraine, and Zelensky should be the first to answer for his actions, Panchenko wrote. And Christopher Miller, a reporter for the Financial Times, also spoke about the secret negotiations. He said, I can confirm that a rushed US-Russian proposal is being pushed to the Ukrainians through Dmitriev, Witkov, and Umarov. It would amount to the capitulation of Ukraine. However, people familiar with the situation tell me that these are only the Kremlin's maximalist demands. They include cutting the Ukrainian army in half, granting official status to the Russian language, giving up certain types of weapons and relinquishing Donbass. Zelensky is unhappy. Zelensky is losing touch with reality. That was the headline of an article published in Britain's The Telegraph. The newspaper notes that there couldn't have been a worse moment for a major corruption scandal in Ukraine, precisely when Zelensky is desperately seeking funding. Kiev is signing arms contracts that Ukraine does not have the money to pay for, the article emphasizes, calling it a form of magical thinking. The piece says that domestic support for Zelensky is falling rapidly, and his behavior is alarming all supporters of Ukraine as it signals desperation. Our source reports that the office and Yermak will be seizing bookmaker businesses and call centers. These are usually protected by office people from the SBU, but millions of dollars circulate there since soldiers lose huge amounts of money on betting, and Ukrainian call centers are among the most profitable in the world and the most advanced in schemes. A major redistribution is looming. If they seize this, as they've seized everything else, the black cash reserves of the office will shrink dramatically, and Zelensky's plan to finance his future presidential campaign will collapse. Sources in the office also said that Andriy Yermak instructed Malyuk to deal with MPs from the Servant of the People Party who have rebelled and want to reshuffle the cabinet and the office. On Bankova Street, they understand that the collapse of the coalition would be a major blow to Zelensky and Yermak, and the vertical of power they built would stop functioning. Thank you all for watching and staying with us until the end. Take care of yourselves, stay informed, and see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.